And welcome back, everyone, to the next episode in this Phillipian training series. My name is Kastan, and I will be leading you through these episodes as we go along. So this episode is all about your intro and your general kind of knowledge about editing. So just in general, editing is where you really take all of the footage that you've accumulated through your shooting and through all of the different work that you've done on set and on location, and it's where you define your footage. It's where you take it and you give it its purpose. You give your footage emotion, and you connect it emotionally with your audience and intellectually with your audience. And so editing is where you're really going to take your footage and you're going to give it its meaning, and that's how your audience is going to perceive it. It doesn't matter how you shot it as much as it matters how you deliver it in the final product. So when you're going into a shoot and when you're going into editing it, you want to make sure that you know your purpose, and always be thinking about that. Make sure you know your purpose. What are you trying to do with the footage that you're capturing? Say you're on location and you're going into an interview, and you know you only want a brief quote from the person that you're interviewing. You might even come out and tell them to try and be succinct in their answers, or to try and give concise wording on their replies, but just know when you're shooting what you want to do with the final product. And again, that comes in editing mainly with pacing. Pacing is how quickly your footage moves along. So we'll kind of come up and look at this really quick. So we'll come into Premiere and we'll look at this project that we have open. This is a Weekend at Andover video, or it's kind of a shorter one. And with this video, you kind of want to keep the pacing on this really quick. You want to make relatively fast cuts so that you're never staying on one shot all that long. So we're kind of moving from one to the next without hanging around too much. And the second big thing you want to keep in mind is purpose. What are you trying to accomplish with your end goal of the project? With something like this, we're trying to give people a brief overview of the weekend, and we're trying to do it with as much information as possible, as quickly as possible. So we're not trying to drag it on forever, but rather we're trying to get the most interesting things out to the audience as quick and as best as possible. Okay, so let's get started talking about Premiere. In Premiere, you have your 4 basic panels, and we'll kind of set this back up. This is how you should generally see Premiere as you come in, and we talk about how to set it up this way in the very first video in this training series. So over here you have all of your different footage bins, which will contain your project, your sequence, all the different footage that you have, anything that you import or create while making the project. In the top left, you have your effects and effects controls. Effects are where you actually find your effects. Say I wanted to do just a simple cross dissolve or something like that. That's where I would find that effect. And say I applied that effect by dragging it onto a piece of footage, and you can see kind of how it affects the footage here. Now you can see it on the footage. Once I've applied that effect to the footage, what you can see is that you have your cross dissolve there, and then if you click on it, that's where you have your effect controls, and you can manipulate, say center cut, starter cut, you can manipulate the effect that you have. Now up in our top right here, we have our program monitor as well as our source monitor, which are 2 distinctly different things. The program monitor monitors what you're going to see on your timeline. So as I scrub through the timeline, scrubbing is just moving the playhead back and forth. As I scrub through the timeline, you can see what you're going to see in the final product. However, if I say go into some of the raw footage that we haven't edited, you can come in and you can see when you double click on that raw footage, it brings you into the source monitor, where inside that source monitor, you can scrub through the footage and get a view of it without having to bring it in to your timeline. So then you can come through here, and as we mentioned previously, maybe set in and out points. They're already in and out points set here, but we can kind of reiterate those, I and O for in and out, and then you can bring that footage in, and you can see it there. And so then obviously down here we have our timeline. And so in our timeline, one thing that's really important to notice is that things are stacked in layers. Video clips and audio are both stacked in layers. And so what you can see is that the things that are on the top, video tracks 2 and 3, the higher the number, the farther up they are. Everything that's on top is going to be shown to the viewer. You can think of it like stacking paper. You're not going to see the paper on the bottom, but you're going to see the paper on the top. And so if we have, say, myself talking here, and then we keep going through, you can see that this clip is a clip of this festival, whereas the one below it is just me talking, but since it's on top, it shines through. Audio functions slightly differently. Because multiple audio tracks can be played at the same time, audio tracks are not exclusive. Rather, you can stack them on top of each other and they'll simply play simultaneously according to how you have them stacked. So you can have my voice narrating this clip, and then you can have maybe some background ambient noise from this event as well. Okay, and so the video is in the top, and then there's a divide, and then the audio is below. You can also make these tracks larger. This is your audio 1 track. You can make that larger, zoom in a little bit here by pinching on the bottom. And now you can see the audio waveform that was captured from the camera. And so this actually makes it really useful when you're editing something like an interview. You can see where the person stops talking in the audio waveform. And so you might be able to see, oh, I think we have a little bit too much dead time here without anyone talking. And then you can also see how noisy this footage is here. Okay, but say you're working on a large project and you have a bunch of different audio or video tracks. The way that you can create more tracks is by simply dragging video and audio sections higher and higher and lower. And then that enables you to layer many different clips together. Okay, cool, but let's talk about some of the different editing tools that you have at your disposal. Over on the left side here, you can see all of these different editing tools, and all of them can be used in different ways. The one that you're probably going to be using the most is the selection tool, which you can access with the shortcut V. The selection tool enables you to click on different clips, drag things around. It enables you to come in here and make really basic edits. You can come to the edge of a clip, and it gives you this red bracket, and that allows you can drag the clip in, and then alternatively you can drag the clip out because you know that there's more source footage there. So if you want this to be a little bit longer, you can drag it out. Say I want this to be even a little bit longer still, I could bring it up and then drag the whole thing out even further. Okay, well, let's undo that. That's the selection tool. The next one that you might be using a fair amount is the ripple edit tool. I like the ripple edit tool a lot because what it enables you to do is, say you have this clip here, and say there is too much dead space after I finish talking, but we've already edited a lot after that clip, so all we want to do is delete this little section without creating a hole in the project. And so if we were using this tool here previously, what you'd have to do is bring this in, and then you can right click in this space and say ripple delete, which works well. And what ripple delete does is when you delete this, it simply moves everything over so that you don't have to do it individually. It just moves it so that you can get rid of that hole in your project. But what your ripple edit tool does, as you may imagine, it does that for you automatically. So as you bring that in, all the edits that you make will ripple the entire project. So let's bring this in. You might want to click on it first, bring it in on this side, and then we can come over to this side, and we can bring this in as well. And so now we have a much cleaner transition. And so that's all part of pacing as well, trying to get kind of the pacing that you desire for your project. The next transition that you may be using, which I don't use all that frequently, but it is good to know how to use, is the rolling edit tool, shortcut N. And what the rolling edit tool enables you to do is simply move an edit in its point in space without affecting the other clips around it so much. So let me give you an example. So say we want to just move this edit point forward. This will simply cut off this one sooner and enable this clip to play for longer. So if we were going to do this using a different tool, it's essentially just moving this edit point that direction as if you were shortening one clip and elongating the other. So that is the rolling edit tool. And the last one that you will probably be using a fair amount is the razor tool. So the razor tool is just a tool that you can use to cut your footage. And then after you cut your footage, you can say come in here and delete that section if that's what you wanted to do. And the razor edit tool can be useful if, say, you're in the middle of something and you just want to cut off. Maybe say I stopped talking for a long time in the middle of this clip and I wanted to get rid of this long silence. I can come in there, I can make two razor cuts in that footage, and then come in there, right click, and say ripple delete, and then that will ripple delete that footage from there. But I'll undo that, and that is the overview of your tools. Okay, so one last thing in here that you'll probably be using a fair amount as well is the snapping feature. So snapping right now is turned on, and we can turn it on and off with S. You can see its little magnet right there. And what snapping does, I'll delete this cross dissolve, is say you have your footage and I want to edit to my playhead. So I'll turn snap on. I moved my playhead to somewhere that, say I want to get rid of all of this space at the beginning. I move my playhead there. I can drag this forward and it snaps to my playhead. I have kind of room to wiggle and it'll stick there. But say, and that's how you'd like to use it most of the time. But say, for example, we want to do a really intricate edit. Say we have a lot of different things going on. Maybe we'll go in here where there's a little bit more clutter and it's a little bit harder to tell what's going on. I want to edit this portion of the video, but I only want to edit it a little bit. So I'll turn snapping off as it is right now, and then I can edit it however I want without having to worry about it snapping to different things and it not working out properly. So if I just want to edit it that much, I can do that without having to worry about snapping. And that'll be pretty helpful in many different scenarios if you're trying to do intricate edits and moving things around. Okay, now really briefly, let's talk a little bit about your effects. So I'll click on this clip right here. I'll select this clip because you always have to select the clip that you're working on. And I'll come over to our effects browser. I already showed you a cross dissolve, but let's do a dip to black. Dip to black is another type of transition, and essentially as it transitions, it just dips the footage to black as it moves along. That's pretty basic. I typically only ever use cross dissolves and dips to black, and of those two, I use dip to black the most. One little tip with using transitions is that you can actually come in here and you can edit how long this transition is right on the timeline. So if you want to make it faster, you can do that, and that's really helpful. But then you can also come into your effect controls, you can specify the duration, as well as specify where the transition starts. So say start at cut, then it'll cut down, and so the footage already cuts before the transition actually fully takes place. So there's a lot of different ways you can use that, although typically I would center it. Okay, so one thing you have to worry a little bit about when you're using transitions is if you have multiple layers. So say I move this so that these abut at this cut. And so say I want to apply a transition so that this clip fades into that clip. But what I do is I come over here, grab a transition, and I drop it on these two clips. What you'll notice is that as it transitions, the top clip doesn't have a fade applied to it, so it starts immediately, whereas the bottom one, if we, say, cut this back, the bottom one transitions in. So that can be something that you have to watch out for as you apply your transitions. Okay, but really quickly before we hit the end of this tutorial, I'd like to talk just a little bit about kind of the timeline features and how that works specifically. So in the timeline, you have additional features attached to these video and audio tracks. And so say we have these clips which are stacked on top of each other, but I only want to see one of them right now. I can come over to your video tracks here, and you can toggle whether or not you see that track. So if I turn off this first track, I turn off this this footage here, and I only see what's underneath it. And if I turn off this bottom one, then you see blackness because there's no longer anything there. The same thing applies to audio in a slightly different way, where you can mute different tracks. So if you want to mute an entire track, then you can do that, as well as the fact that you can solo tracks. So in this instance, you only hear that one track and everything else is essentially muted. But it's good to keep in mind that for both audio and video, this applies to that entire horizontal track, not just to one specific clip or to audio or video alike. It's just to the either audio or video track, and it's to the entire horizontal piece. Okay, the last thing I want to mention before the end of the video is your ability to toggle on and off playback resolution. So say my computer was struggling with playing back this video in full speed and at full resolution. What I would have to do is, instead of playing it in full resolution, I can play it either half or a quarter. So we'll try half, and then it may not look quite as sharp, but it'll be able to play back much easier. And this especially gets difficult for a computer to do if you have a lot of effects applied to your piece, if you have color correction or grading applied to your piece. It can be very difficult for a computer to play it back at full speed and at full resolution. So you can bring that resolution down and then still be able to watch it in real time. One indicator that helps me with this is I have this little green icon that says 0 frames dropped during playback. And so that tells me that it's been playing back just fine without missing anything while it's been playing. The way you can turn that feature on is if you come over to the wrench and then you turn on Show Dropped Frames Indicator. If I turn that off, you can see it disappears, and so that will just let you know that you don't have any dropped frames. If you start dropping frames, that indicator will turn yellow, and it will be probably pretty apparent in your video monitor to your eyes. Okay, well that about wraps up to this introductory course to editing. I think this will be one of the longer videos that we produce as a singular element. So bear with the training tutorial series. Keep working alongside the tutorials in Premiere, and just keep in mind that you can always look things up online. But it'll be most helpful if you do the things as I'm doing them, and maybe take notes and just keep everything in mind, because the best way to learn is to do it yourself. Okay, well thanks for watching. I'm Kastan Day, and this is Phillipian Video.